You're watching the Mondays with Midja podcast. Midja is founder and CEO of Legal Leadership, a company specialising in the leadership training and coaching of lawyers. Get set to jumpstart your week with a shot of mojo as Midja and her guests talk all things life, love and leadership.
Hey, it's Monday and I'm Midja, and welcome to the podcast all about life, love and leadership. And we have taken the podcast on the road today, so it looks a little bit different. We are in the boardroom of Travis Schultz and Partners law firm, and I'm speaking to Travis Schultz. So I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks for having me along, Midge. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So before we dive deep into leadership and the law and our profession and what's going on, I firstly have to ask you about your sense of style, Travis, because whenever I see you out and about, conferences, speaking at things, wherever, the outfit, the pants, the suit, I mean, I think there goes a confident man. So tell me, where does that sense of style come from and that bit of playfulness, I guess?
I don't know that anyone's ever used the word style to describe my dress sense, Mitch, but I'm flattered. Thank you.
Good.
There's nothing to it. I guess I stopped caring what other people think some years ago and just thought, be yourself. And so I just be myself and just wear what I like. It appeals to me. If you want to wear loud pants, wear loud pants.
Love that. So, you know, we talk a little bit about life lessons on the podcast as well. And so that, you know, phrase that you just used around not caring what anyone thinks of you. Talk to me more about that, where that comes from, and maybe I misquoted that, but tell me more about that.
I think it's more around being yourself, Midge.
Yep.
Be true to who you are, and there's no shame in being honest with the world about what you want to be and how you want to be. For me, it's just tokenism, I guess, that I choose to wear pants that some people find are a little more vibrant than normal for a lawyer, but that's just part of me. I care what people think about me. Everybody does. I just don't care if people go, nah, don't like your pants. Pretty simple.
Absolutely with the pants. But, you know, when we look to leadership and we look at, I suppose, the principles around leadership and what makes a great leader and that integrity piece and what you stand for piece. And talk to me about that, because to kind of be on the podcast, I'm looking for leaders that people tell me good stuff about. And so for you, and I know you've managed and led lots of teams and lots of people, what makes a great leader?
You could ask, and thank you, I'm flattered by, again, what you say. When it comes to leadership, I think at the end of the day and at its nub, leadership requires attitude rather than aptitude. Mm-hmm. It comes down to character rather than anything that you've learned. And you know, there are all sorts of things that great leaders have in terms of their courage, their character, their vision, their empathy, their trustworthiness. They're all really important, but at the end of the day, it's attitude over aptitude.
Mm-hmm. So around, you know, leadership skills, if you like, or those capabilities, you think those kind of things sometimes are things that people can learn. People can get better at some of those more practical sides of leading and leading teams.
Yeah, look, when it comes to leadership, I think it's fair to say that not everyone is born with the skills that are required. Some people find those innate skills of a leader to be ones that don't just come within their DNA, and they need to work on them. We can all learn them. We can all round our edges out. You'll never be something that you're not, or at least you shouldn't be. And not everyone wants to be or is destined to take on a role that involves leadership at a higher level. But when it comes to leadership, I think you can learn the skills, but at the end of the day, we need to realise that, somewhat ironically, the soft skills are actually hard and fast non-negotiables when it comes to leadership.
So talk to me about lawyers and leadership. So I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer, we know lots of lawyers. So the traits of being a great lawyer, how does that equate to some of the traits of leadership?
And I'm glad you raised this issue of lawyers and leadership, because we as law firms have long made one terrible mistake in that we assume that our top performing lawyers against KPIs and benchmarks are the ones we should be promoting to leadership roles. We have this assumption that just because so-and-so, Jane or Rebecca or whoever it might be, was our high-flying, high performer, the rainmaker that brings in the work, the go-getter, or the person who blows away their budgets and contributes to revenue like nobody else, we assume that because they're high performers against those metrics, that they're necessarily going to be in a position to lead and lead high-performing teams. But that's just not the case. It's a fallacy. The two do not necessarily go hand in hand. Just because Jane or Rebecca have the ability to bring in the work, they have the ability to do the work, they're efficient, they're effective, and they bring in lots of bucks, doesn't mean that they're going to be able to relate to people, doesn't mean they have the empathy that is required, doesn't mean that they're trusted. And they're really important characteristics of leaders in law firms. And I'm not sure why we as a profession continue to look to promote those who have been high performers against the metrics that are valuable to the business of a law firm, as opposed to those who earn the trust, respect and confidence of a team.
Yeah, two very different skill sets and different approaches, and certainly, throughout my career, I've coached and mentored lots of lawyers who are like, I don't want to be in this position. I don't know why I'm leading a team. I just wanted to practice law, and I loved practicing law, and now I feel like I'm not doing this people leadership very well, and it impacts their reputation. They don't feel great about themselves. They lose confidence. And I've seen them, that reputation piece really go downward, and because of the position they've been put in.
And I think it's probably historical in some respects too, because the profession has always had a partnership model, and in a partnership you're meant to have leverage beneath you in the classic pyramid, and so each partner is expected to supervise a certain number of senior associates who supervise a number of associates who look after and mentor a number of solicitors who look after X number of graduates and law clerks, and so it goes down the chain. There's just an assumption that as you rise up this totem pole, so to speak, that necessarily you are learning somehow, whether by osmosis or otherwise, the leadership skills that are required as you're reaching those more senior roles. And we don't teach it. The universities don't teach it. So where are these people getting these great leadership skills from that are going to enable them to ensure the long-term success of the organisation?
And so do you think, insofar, particularly like leading lawyers, do you think there is a component there around getting the runs on the board and being able to have those results to be able to lead, though? Do you think it there is a part there to play?
Absolutely. Lawyers don't get the opportunity to lead until they've got the runs on the board. Yeah. Lawyers don't get promoted to that next rank in the organisational chart until they've performed against metrics and everyone accepts that they're ready to move up. You necessarily must have a threshold level of competence. Don't get me wrong. When I say attitude over aptitude, there is a threshold level, in my view, of competence that you have to fulfil the necessary requirements of that role. But when it comes to leadership, I'd like to think that there's more at stake and there's more at play than just metrics. Leaders, don't just have a vision, they inspire, they engage. They are the ones who navigate their group towards a common purpose. They unite them. Just because someone necessarily bills lots or brings in lots doesn't mean they're inspiring their team, doesn't mean they're trusted, doesn't mean that they're demonstrating the empathy, that they are compassionate, that they are bringing out the best or nurturing others, empowering others. Quite the contrary. Too often we find in law firms, and not just law firms, in organisations, that those who are very, very successful and high-performing against metrics are often those who squash everyone else along the way. The internal terrorist who looks great on paper, but boy, what a path of destruction they leave. We've all seen them.
Yeah, the win-lose paradigm is if in order for me to win, everyone around me must lose, and I've made it to the top, but with bloodshed behind them.
With what collateral damage? So I think I love this conversation, and for law firms in particular, because we haven't done it well, and I'm not pretending for one moment that in law firms that I've managed and led in the past, we've always done it right either. We haven't. But as a leader, you've just got to learn from your mistakes. Don't be afraid to make a mistake, just learn from it.
So what do you think, like, if we look at the next, 5, 10 years in the legal profession in Australia and what it needs from a leadership perspective? Because obviously we see the attrition rates, we see, burnout, we see the mental health statistics, we see all that coming through right now. We have seen that for a number of years. What do our leaders need to do?
Well, of course, the COVID-19 has brought with it a whole paradigm shift, and the number one skill of leaders in law firms these days must necessarily be our adaptability. Like never before have we had to scan the landscape, take a 360-degree view and pivot our course like never before. For me, moving forwards, I think we need to be honest with ourselves. I don't pretend that in law, work-life balance is something that's necessarily easy in private practice, particularly in a busy private practice. I have taken the view that we need to move more towards what I term work-life synchronization. The work just has to get done. Client needs need to be met. They need to be exceeded. The organisation has needs. Any professional services firm does. But we need to find ways for ourselves and our team to synchronise our work in a way that works with our life and what's important to us. We need to be prepared to make concessions and to adapt. There will be times where there might be compromises. But as long as we're not selfish, as long as the way we do our work doesn't prevent others in our team from doing theirs, then I think we need to accept that we should allow people to be relatively flexible as long as the needs of the organisation are met. Now, of course, what's possible in a consumer law firm is very different to what is possible in a business law or a franchising or a family law or a tax law. If your clients are corporate behemoths abroad, it doesn't matter where you're doing the work at all. But if you're client focused in a consumer law area where your client wants to eyeball you, wants to have that empathy, wants to shed a tear, tell you a long story where that's necessary, there are times when that might need to be person to person, particularly at the outset when you do ID checks and all of those sorts of things to know your client. It's just necessary that you're going to have to be client-facing from time to time. So every practice is going to be different, but I just think from a managerial and leadership perspective, we need to accept that our teams want something different to what you and I might have wanted when we were coming through law and law school and starting our careers.
Yes, certainly. And I've been trying to talk to a lot of young lawyers or grads coming out because a lot of work that I do is mostly at, partnership level or senior leadership level. So I've been very keen lately to speak to people entering the profession to ask them, well, what do you want from leaders? And then asking what the leaders want from them to see if I can connect the two. And again, I think like anything, I'm hearing from law students a vast array of different things that they want. So some of our law students are ready to throw themselves in long hours. They're ready for it and have that real more corporate life vision for themselves. And others that I speak to want something completely different from their legal career. Still want to be involved in the law, but maybe not in that more traditional game plan of I'm going to go up the hierarchy and become a partner of big law.
But not everyone aspires to being a partner at big law.
Absolutely not.
And not everyone enters the law with the same vision or purpose. It's just a fact of life, I guess, for law firms in the 21st century. But in terms of what the future holds, I will be surprised if in 10 years' time we don't move to a situation where it's taken for granted that to the extent that it is possible, that a couple of days a week are worked remotely or from home, telecommuted, so to speak. It seems to have worked okay with the pandemic. Overall, some people say they've been better working from home. Others have said it's been a disaster, particularly with homeschooling and just trying to deal with all the competing demands. But the reality is, whether it works or it doesn't, we're in a time in the world where the workforce, it's a competitive environment to get the best talent. And if you want the best talent, you're going to have to work within their needs if you want them to remain in your organisation, to flourish there, to thrive, and to want to remain a part of its strategic future. We're just going to have to adapt and accept that bums on seats is not necessarily as important as it may have been in the 1980s.
And what, because if we look at the stats of the profession now, obviously we're seeing a lot of micro firms, a lot of people going into practice for themselves, more so than we've ever seen. Talk to me about that trend and why you think we're seeing that.
I think there's more than one reason. It's always multifactorial. It's being said that there's been a breakaway from the corporate model, from this idea that you need to be part of a larger firm, that larger firms can't offer what everybody wants. There's a bit of truth in that, but the reality is that 20 years ago, there were an awful lot of people who were binding themselves to these large firms and treading down that well-worn path towards partnership and moving up the hierarchy, who were marching to the tune of a syncopated drum that they didn't really enjoy. It wasn't them, but they were doing it because there was no alternative. But today, the barriers to entry to start up a law firm are a tenth, are a fifth of what they once were. No longer do you need bricks and mortar to hang your shingle on. No longer do you need to employ a range of staff for all of those other functions, from administration to marketing to management to trust accounting to reception. You can walk into a serviced office in any building in any major city in Australia and they'll do all that for you for next to nothing. You need a laptop and a mobile phone, maybe a dictaphone, but drag and dictate. And for a very, very trivial sum of money, you get a law firm. Now, 20 years ago, that just wasn't possible. And so while everyone talks about the fact that there's this trend to break away from the values, the ethos and the practices of the large law firms, I suspect that those cracks were appearing many, many years ago. It's just that the barriers to the alternative were too high, and now they're not. Now it's very easy to start up your own law firm.
What advice would you give to those lawyers? Because you've had obviously your own firm, so what advice do you give them starting out on their own?
If you're a lawyer who, whether you're a young lawyer or you're just a lawyer who wants to start off on their own, number one would be to ensure that you really know what it is you're looking for. because there are some people who think, yep, I'm going to start up my own law firm because I want to do A, B or C. And the fact that A, B or C just turns out not really to be possible. And it's a financial disaster, and it causes relationship strain because of the hours and the demands and the loss of income and all the rest of it. We've seen a lot of small practices fail and close. Not every small practice succeeds. So number one would be know what your why is. And now I'm borrowing from Simon Sinek. I hesitate to do that. I apologise. But understand what you're doing. What's your purpose?
Yep.
What's your mission? What's your strategy? Number two, you've got to have a strategy to ensure that it can succeed. And three, you need to test your strategy and ensure that you have the capital required to get it off the ground, and that you have tested the assumptions about where your work's going to come from to make sure it works. But if you want to do it, follow your dreams. Just do it with your eyes open.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is a bigger issue, of course, for the profession as a whole, Midge. We've seen, in my time on the Queensland Law Society Council, I can remember seeing the numbers of principal practicing certificates in the annual State of the Profession reports, or the biannual State of the Profession reports, and there was a staggering increase over a 5-year period when you compared the numbers that more than doubled in terms of single principal practicing certificate law firms in Queensland. It was just astonishing. But of course, when you have all these micro firms that don't have the resources of an accounts team, of a trust account manager, of a marketing team, of all those structures around you, and you get busy, the first thing you stop doing is your paperwork, your trust account, and your compliance stuff. I worry about that another day. I'm too busy. I've got this job over here to do.
Clients,
That's most important, right?
Yes.
And of course, now regulatory management and the cost of regulatory compliance is increasing dramatically. And most importantly, non-compliance is a big problem, because you've got to expect that when you've got all of these micro practices, a lot of them are just struggling. They're struggling, and through no fault of their own. They don't have the resources or the money to put on a trust account manager. And we're seeing more and more funds expended by the professional body, by the Queensland Law Society here in Queensland at least, in dealing with that. And it's going to be a bigger problem. The more micros we get, the more resources are going to have to go into assisting them and then dealing with non-compliances. And what does it mean for the profession? Oh, look, it's going to mean that we're going to have to cover the cost of that. It's going to have to be something that we budget for in practicing certificate fees. It's an issue. No one wants to see any of our colleagues in small practices fail. It's just something to be mindful of.
And there might be an opportunity in that space for someone or a business out there that might be able to be in that space and help out. Who knows?
And there are some small practices already helping out in that space already. They're doing it rather cost effectively. Hopefully the costs continue to come down, where they provide all of those functions for small practices, from trust accounting through to compliance, regulatory, and even doing your financials and your budgets. Is becoming more cost effective. But if you're a small micro practice, even $10,000, $15,000 a year to deal with all that stuff, which doesn't sound like a lot to a bigger firm, it's a lot to a small practitioner.
Absolutely. So, interesting times ahead. Watch the space. Now, Travis, we have a section on the podcast known as Leader Shit. So it's the shittiest thing that we've seen in leadership. It can also be confession time. So it can be for you in your leadership roles, something you've done that's stayed with you that you've kind of thought, maybe wasn't the best decision, or something you've done that in hindsight you're like, I'd do that differently if those circumstances came up again. Something for you that springs to mind around that.
Oh, there's plenty of those, Midge. You've got to always be prepared to talk about your mistakes, own them, talk about them, learn from them, share them. Hopefully others don't make the same mistake that way. But I could fill books full of mistakes I've made over the years in my time managing law firms and in a leadership role. From times where ethical boundaries have been tested, I can remember as an article clerk, a second-year article clerk, seeing a partner in a firm charging a hotel account with what appeared to me to be a whole lot of private wine being charged to a client's accountant. And at the time thinking, I wonder, is that right? Is there something wrong there? And not having the guts and the courage to actually raise it with someone and say, hey, just check in, just want to make sure. Because, as an article clerk, you just don't talk about
You're
something.
not saying anything.
And, I look back and just wish I'd had the intestinal fortitude to have the conviction and the courage of values to at least ask the question. I was concerned at the time, of course. I'm, a young article clerk, shit scared that if I get this call wrong, I could be out my arse. That's the risk you take. But, I didn't have the courage. If I had my time again, I'd hope that I could man up a bit, so to speak. But that's just one. But there have been plenty of mistakes. Perhaps one that I hesitate to share, which to this day it pains me, was a girl I was close to who worked in the firm, a young lady I'd worked with for many years who'd had a range of illnesses and had some troubles. And, there was a time, more than a decade in, she'd been away, had kids, come back from maternity leave, returned to work, and things escalated in that, she'd put on a lot of weight. She wasn't turning up to work on time. Performance dropped. She, would disappear for periods during the day. I heard the girls talk that she'd been found asleep in the ladies' toilet, and all this coincided with the time that bottles of wine started disappearing from the office store where we used to keep them. And it was only months later that the front page of the paper had a photograph and a heading of young mother caught drink driving kids to school 4 times the legal limit. It was only a couple of years later that she died from organ failure, and I cried. But I can tell you, I'm sure her 2 kids cried a lot more. If only as a leader I had seen all those signs and put the pieces of the puzzle together. If only I'd had the emotional intelligence to actually understand what was going on, not just to see it with the 20/20 vision of hindsight. I could maybe, just maybe have helped to have changed the trajectory of that spiral. And, that's one of the big failings of mine as a leader, someone that you're in the organisation and you're close to, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it, Mitch.
And it's that, that connection with our people in leadership roles. And do you sometimes think as leaders, particularly in corporate and maybe in the law, that, sometimes we keep that distance a little bit?
Yeah, look, I
don't
think
know, that we may not want to get close sometimes to the people we work with, or what is it about that?
Look, we as leaders, we need to show compassion. I think we're using the term compassion these days rather than just empathy. But there's, a natural resistance, of course, as well, because you don't want to be seen as intruding on people's personal lives. You don't want to be crossing that boundary. It's a grey chasm, and at times, by asking too many questions and being too close, you risk that. And in this day and age, we are all acutely aware of the legislative boundaries that are put in place. But I think we need to show that we care. We need to ask questions. We need to go through the process of compassionate conversations, which starts with empathetic listening. You've just got to listen to understand. You've then got to communicate to ensure that you understand and have that deeper insight into the issue. And then third, you've got to demonstrate, you've got to prove your compassion by repeating back to them and giving them a way forward. And I think, in leading law firms, that's just an approach we need to take. There's going to be risks if we, asked the wrong question, that we've gone too far in terms of going to a personal life. But no, I think we have an obligation to our team to understand what's going on in their world in case there's ways that we can adapt and adjust their role to make life better for them. If we want to retain the best people forever in our organisation, they've got to love the place, they've got to love their leadership. And if you show enough interest and concern for them, if you confide in them, they will trust in you.
And it's often a question I get asked, and I know leaders kind of struggle with that. If we're talking about like tough conversations or raising feedback, or we're seeing things and they're concerning us, and being able to have that conversation with people. A lot of response I get back is, but what about if I don't know what to do with what I get from someone? And I just feel like I don't want to open that can of worms. Or lots of leaders talk to me about that hesitation of rather, look, I know there's an elephant in the room. I'm going to put a tablecloth over it, keep it in the corner, and just cross my fingers and hope that the performance increases, or the performance or the behaviour changes, or I'm just going to hope.
We all know, Midge, that courageous conversations are what are required, and
Yes.
we all do it. Sometimes you just got to rip off that proverbial Band-Aid and deal with it.
Absolutely.
It's not easy. I don't pretend it's easy, and I don't pretend that I haven't done it. Of course I've done it. We've all done it. You're busy. You're like, oh, shit, I don't want to deal with that right now.
I know. You mentioned something there around just like having that loyalty or just connection with the leadership. And I know for you that community work for yourself and also for your law firm is really important. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, around the importance of that connection piece with the firm and the community and purpose and all of that.
Look, that's just a philosophical thing. I really believe that we as a professional services firm are in a privileged position to serve our community as part of a profession. I think we should be behaving as a professional services firm, not as a business. I like to disavow any suggestion that my firm operates as a business. We're not. And I think part of that is community engagement. We historically, as a profession, have done a lot of pro bono work. We've worked in our communities. We've given back. We've supported those who've supported us. And it's no different in 2022. We are blessed to have the support of the community. I think we have an obligation to give back. And so much of that just involves, working with community groups, charities, professional services organisations, the not-for-profits. Just give back where you can. Believe in karma. I mean, if you just keep on giving and give a bit more, it will come back to you, Mitch, in spades. Just believe that. And the community will be a better place for it. The good that you can do as a lawyer with your experience and your law degree, the good that you can achieve is enormous. Don't have to always be paid for it. I think it's disappointing, I think, if we don't do a bit of it. It just comes with the privilege of being a profession, I think.
Absolutely. And as you said, just that, connecting back with purpose and giving people a law firm they can be proud of, being a part of that team, giving back. And I know for me, doing the Dancing CEOs for Women's Legal Services, which is my first sort of foray into something of that magnitude, which is completely scary, being on stage very shortly in a sequin leotard, which will be interesting in Brisbane City Hall. But the giving back piece and being able to, I don't know, like leverage the privilege that I have around just the connections I have and who I know and being able to bring those people together to raise some funds and to have a whole heap of fun along the way as well. It has been, it's been the best, and I've done lots in my career, but it has been the absolute best time for me. I've loved it.
But it's twofold. So you get to call upon the networks and the connections and the friendships that your professional service over the years has given. and you're able to leverage off those for the sake of a very, very worthy charitable cause. But secondly, those around you, and not least of all your staff, are proud of you, proud of what you're doing, and they're engaged by it. And they want more and more to follow because they can see the positive difference that their leader is making in the wider community. Good on you, Midge.
Thanks, Travis. It's a feel-good kind of podcast we're having today. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to make sure if there was anything else that I haven't asked you, that we haven't covered around leadership, around the law, around our profession, where we're at, where we're heading. Any other key messages that you wanted to finish up on?
No, I think it's all been said. We could go around in circles with leadership concepts for hours.
That's right.
I love it as much as you do.
We'd need a bottle of red though, Trav.
Pretty more than one, I suspect. But, thanks for having me along, Midge. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I love these conversations, and I think they're important to have. There's nothing wrong with a bit of self-reflection from time to time, learning from your own mistakes and hopefully those that others share with you as well.
Absolutely. Now, before we leave, I have the fortune cookies without the cookies, of course. So
That's the low carbohydrate version of a fortune cookie.
It absolutely is. No calories here. It's a bit of the woo-woo moment. Or how you feel about a bit of woo-woo, Travis. But this is a message that maybe you need to hear, or I don't know, that our listeners need to hear. So today we have our boxes. We have Dream and Trust Your Crazy Ideas. Which box do you want?
I'm going to dream today.
Oh, he's going to dream. All right, I'm going to open this up. Let's get the cards out and see today's message.
And the winner is?
There we go. Pop it open.
And the trouble is, if you don't risk anything, you risk even more. Erica Jeong. Very deep. There's a lot in that. A lot about leadership as well. You need to be prepared to extend yourself. Be prepared to make mistakes. Just admit to them and learn from them.
Absolutely. Now, Travis, where can people connect with you, talk to you, find out more about you?
Always happy to chat about this sort of stuff, to share my failures over the year. I'm a senior counsellor for the Queensland Law Society as well, so any professional ethical issues, more than happy to chat as well in that capacity. Can easily find me by email, travis.schultz@schultzlaw.com.au, or my mobile 0419441977. Always happy to chat, always happy to share. Thanks again for having me along, Midge.
Thanks, Travis. And that is a wrap on our podcast. You go out there and spread your magic this week. I'm Midja, and thank God it's Monday.
We trust you enjoyed this episode of the Mondays with Midja podcast. Host Midja Fisher is a leadership expert, keynote speaker, coach and facilitator. To find out more about Midja, visit midja.com.au or follow her on Instagram at Midja Fisher, and make sure you subscribe, share and leave a review.